We're talking today with Todd Burpo, the author of the book Heaven is for Real, and also now a major motion picture coming out. So, the book was just a phenomenon.
It was.
52 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, something like that.
Well, actually, it's been on for over 3 years, and it's been #1 for 64 weeks.
Look at you.
That's incredible. Yeah,
that is amazing. Yeah. And, just about everybody has heard the story, but for those few who might not, this was a book about your son who had a ruptured appendix.
He did.
And major medical problems.
Yes.
I think they even indicated to you and your wife that he may not survive.
Well, I remember asking the doctor if he was going to be okay during that emergency surgery, and when the doctor says nothing to you, and this is the doctor who I'd had a mastectomy or a lumpectomy by this same doctor just a couple months to that, so we knew each other. That was one of my lowest lows right there at that moment. Yeah.
Well, I have 2 sons, and I just, any child,
Yeah.
when they're sick, that must be the worst of the worst.
It's a nightmare. I think when you talk about miracles, sometimes we forget that sometimes miracles are preceded by incredibly painful circumstances. And it's a nightmare. And I think not only in our book, but in the movie, people are going to realize how much it hurts and how hard it is to watch a child suffer. My wife, when the scenes in the movie are being played, she conveniently leaves the cinema because she goes, I just can't watch that anymore. I can't do it.
That's so hard. But also you're a minister.
Yes.
And sometimes I think that people expect ministers to be able to endure things like that almost superhumanly.
Yeah.
Did you have people who you didn't want to let down in front of, or
I think
any feelings of that sort?
Well, being a dad, and I think sometimes ministers are the guilty parties here, and sometimes it's the expectations of other people. I think some ministers try to present themselves as being different, which I don't know. I'm sure not different. I'm just a dad, and I'm a dad more than I'm a minister. And I think as a dad, to provide for and protect your family is what I feel is my 2 primary roles. And when my son was yelling at me and they were wheeling him away, Dad, don't let him take me, that's my lowest moment ever as a dad. And inside me, that his screams turned to rage, and that rage was towards God. It was like, God, what are you doing here? I mean, I'm trying to serve you and trying to do what hard things for you to help others, and now this. And so I know that when my son talks about me going into that room by myself, he describes it very accurately. You were yelling at God. Oh boy, was I.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's one of the scenes that they have advertised in the trailer that that your son observed, because he had an out-of-body, near-death, I don't know what kind of classification or term you want to put on it.
Well, I've been trying to struggle with that too. He never did flatline, but even Dr. Haller and the surgeon explained to me, kids that young, they don't fade.
How old was he?
3 years and 10 months.
Wow.
Not quite 4. And when they die, he says, when they're that sick, their vitals are very strong, and then they're just gone. There's no warning. And so, but he never did fade or stop. His heart never stopped during surgery, and yet it's undeniable that he left his body.
But he did have a miraculous recovery based on what his medical problems were, I would say, I observed. And then after that, how long was it before he began to make statements concerning heaven?
Well, his first statement he ever made was when he was yelling for me after that first surgery. I remember the nurse coming out into the waiting room, "Is Colton's dad out here? Well, your son's screaming for you and we can't calm him down. Will you please come back?" And I remember going to him, and the first thing he said to me was, "Dad, do you know I almost died?" And it scared me to death. I wished he had maybe said, "Do you know I just went to heaven? Do you know I just saw Jesus? Do you know?" But he didn't. And I'd been begging him for days not to quit. Don't give up on me. And so I changed the subject. But it wasn't until 4 months later we're driving back through that town, and we say, "Hey, Colton, you want to go back to the hospital?" Up to that point, Mom and I just wanted to forget. We couldn't even talk about it. But we kind of joked about it a little bit, and he goes, "Oh, no, I don't want to go back. Send Cassie." But
that's his
Dad,
sister.
That's his sister. Yeah, it's her turn to go. But it's like, but Dad, the angels sang to me while I was there. That was our wake-up moment when he said that.
And so at that point, then bells went off, and you thought he actually had
Well, we started
that
asking
experience.
questions. What do you mean angels sing to you?
And at this time, though, he was, what, 4 years old?
4 years old, yep.
You know, and I've seen, I went to watch, you know, different interviews that you've given and he's given. But, you know, even now, I think I saw one when he was like 11 years old. He's what, 14?
14 now.
Yeah.
Yep.
He was so great verbally. You know, he speaks well.
He does.
And in reading the book, he's so good with verbalization.
Well, you know, a lot of people say a kid can't speak like that, but everyone that knows Colton, oh, that sounds just like Colton. They knew, you know, we never misquoted Colton ever. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it proceeded, you know, just day after day after day that he would say more things.
Well, it was probably more like hit and miss because we didn't know what he had seen and not seen. But when he told me that he could see me and where I was and what I was doing while he was in surgery and what his mom was doing, we had been together all the time in front of him, and how he could tell we were in different parts of the hospital. And then that room, I remember closing the door, pulling the curtains. No one saw me in there. And you don't brag about stuff like that. I didn't tell my wife what I did. And when I knew he couldn't make that up and he was nailing all the details, that's when I was like, what did I miss? Yeah.
Todd, what do you think was the most important revelation that he made about being in heaven?
Well, I think there's a lot of them, but probably the most impacting one is when he talked about his sister for us. Miscarriage was something we didn't know how to deal with. We'd had a miscarriage.
And this was after Connor, I misspoke his name, your son's, that was after his birth or before? Before.
We'd had a miscarriage
Colton,
between, Cassie's our oldest, then we had a miscarriage, and then we had Colton. And Colton was still too young to talk about babies dying in their mommy's tummies without scaring them to death. We'd never had that conversation. And one of the things the movie just nails is when he started talking to his mom about it, he's like, well, you had a baby die in your tummy, didn't you, Mom? That's how these conversations would start. And you go, where did this come from? We were just doing life. And her first question is like, who told you that? And he's like, well, she did, Mom. She told me she died in your tummy. And things like that, that we knew the information wasn't coming from down here by any means. But that healing he gave to us, I think there's another line in the movie where I tell the character that Margot Martindale plays, or Greg does for me, I should say, let's get the right people right.
We got you together.
Yeah, you never have to apologize for a broken part that you carry. Because when my son almost died, some piece broke in me, and I don't know if it's quite fixed yet. That moment when he told me about my daughter in heaven and how she sees Mom and I, how she can't wait for us to get there, and how she rushed out and gave him a hug, and he was like, Mom, I didn't like that. I don't like hugs very much. I mean, he never lost his boyness because he went to heaven. But here's a kid that's not making stuff up. And he's not changing his character. He's still him. But that moment, I had that broken part get healed. It got fixed. And that's where I think a lot of people, when they read Colton, or hopefully when they even watch Connor play Colton, I hope a lot of broken parts get fixed.
Well, I mean, even hearing you talk about it, you know, you just talking about it gives chills. Like, you know, then when it gets visual on the screen, it's even more so. But why do you think Colton was the one who was chosen to come back and talk about heaven? Well,
I don't know why Colton was chosen, but I know why a kid was. I think I know the answer to that one. A kid is, they're not polluted by adult think. They don't have an agenda. They don't have to explain everything. And he just sits there and goes, well, I don't know why it happened, but this is what happened. This is what I saw. And I think people know that the best witness you're ever going to get is a child. Adults all have agendas or motives. Children don't. And I think the next thing is the Bible talks about a faith, childlike faith. I was cynical, and I was a pastor. I mean, I'm not proud about that, but it's the truth.
Still a pastor.
Yeah, I'm still a pastor, and
still cynical.
Still cynical, I'm afraid. You know, isn't it amazing how a child isn't? And God says, I like that. And I wish you adults would be more like a kid. And I think that's why God wanted to have a kid talk about heaven.
Does he continue to this day to talk about his experience, just in conversation, or have there been new revelations?
Not so much new revelations, but he answers questions all the time. I think a lot of people, the movie's going to do a good job of explaining small town life. If a city person reads the book, they don't understand small town dynamics. But in a small town of 2,000, everyone knows everyone's business. There's no hiding in a corner. There's no way to get away from anything. But he's grown up with the same kids since kindergarten. I think he's got like 55 kids or close to that in his class. But he went to kindergarten with those same 55 kids that he's now a freshman in high school with. And people can't imagine a teenager going to high school saying, hey, I went to heaven, and not getting a lot of flack for that.
Right.
But you can imagine a kindergartner going to kindergarten class and talking to their friends, and these kindergartners going, oh, really? Well, tell us about heaven. And so since he's grown up with these kids, he's just Colton in Imperial. He's not a big deal there because he's talked about heaven for 11 years now. But they still come up and ask him questions, but most of the questions today are, hey, Colton, can you get me out of school? Can I go with you on your next trip? But they do ask him some questions at time. But I really value that because I see his friends come around him as people and critics slam him, and they're like, hey, Colton's told us this for years now.
But, children, yes, are more accepting,
yes, exactly.
more supportive, etc., of their own. But have you run into cynicism?
Oh, all the time.
People who I know who say it's all fraud, it's all, you put those words in his mouth, that type of thing. How do you deal with that, Todd?
Well, for us, my best answer is I'm a dad. And when I wrote the book, I wanted my son to respect me. I still do. If I wrote something in that book that wasn't true, he wouldn't respect me. On the same level, I come from a small town. Where are all the people from Imperial driving around, flying around, saying the Burpos made this up? I asked my critics, where are they? You can't make something up like this in a small town. Now, they might not agree with everything Colton says, but the events and what he says, and he's been talking about heaven for a long time. I have 2,000 witnesses. How many witnesses do you have?
Yeah.
And that's why I just tell people that's the truth.
It's not just me.
It's not
just
me.
him.
Exactly. And I think Thomas Nelson, too, before they ever...
Who were the publishers?
The publishers of the book, I was investigated. They looked at the medical records. I had a writer go around and interview people in town. And then when they found out
like
that...
a background check.
Yeah. And of course they did. And it's like... And they came back going, this is true. Because it is. These questions just come in my mind, but since he had been to heaven, did people expect him to have healing abilities or anything of that nature just because of his experience? Some have, but I think Cassie sums it up best. In the book and in the movie, I don't think this is a spoiler, but she makes the comment, yeah, my brother went to heaven and came back, but he's still no angel. Let me tell you. His dad's not an angel, his sister isn't either, we're still just people. Now, we are people of faith, but at the same time, we have the same struggles, issues, trials, and Colton's now a teenager. He's still trying to grow up just like any other freshman is.
Now, the movie's going to come out, and even with the book having been out and being on television for interviews and everything, but this is a different kind of celebrity that's going to come to you. How are you going to handle that? Well,
I don't know. I know there's some things in the unknown, and we had a family discussion about this even just a few weeks ago. My kids saw the movie for the first time, and they were like, they enjoyed it. That was the first thing.
Well, that's good.
The biggest thing to me was my 3 kids. My 9-year-old's probably the biggest critic, all sitting down saying, this is going to be good. We can support this film. But then we had the discussion, well, what's going to happen? How are people going to react to the movie? And basically, we sat down and we prayed together as a family. But the bottom line is, I remember hearing this on the radio and repeating it to my kids. Worry is never going to make tomorrow better, but it sure make today a lot worse. So all we can do is do what we've always done, support each other, and move forward. And our biggest prayer and my biggest thought is his friends that have heard him talk about heaven all these years, I think they're going to think the movie's pretty cool. But at the end of the day, they're still going to know it's just Colton. So people go, why do you stay in a small town? That's why.
Now, you said your 3 kids just then.
You have Colton, then his older sister, Cassie, and he's got a younger brother, Colby.
Oh, there's another. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking about the miscarriage, but
No.
you have 3 living children who do. Has it put any pressure on Cassidy, though? All of this attention being focused on her brother?
Well, I think she really had a hard time with the traveling when we first started traveling. That was a hard adjustment for her. It really was. But I think she's worked through that, and I think in the movie too, I think she becomes the hero in the movie, and when you watch it, you'll see that she likes that.
You know, I know there's this thing where you're saying you're going to have to teach her how to get tough and not hurt her knuckles.
I've been in movie theaters, but I was sitting in one movie theater where they were doing a screening of the movie, and they didn't know I was in the room. They just told the audience, "We have a surprise for you at the end of the film." Mm-hmm. And
surprise.
Yeah, at that scene where she stands up for her brother, I saw people stand up and cheer and scream at that moment. I'm like, I don't think I've seen that in too many theaters. Mm-hmm. I mean, people really get into this film. It's good. I mean, not only did I see people cry, then laugh, and then cheer. It's an honest film about real people, and I think this film really connects with people because of that.
I don't want to get too much into we can't get too much into the religion because it's so much part of religion is part of the story. But do you think that this story and the film will lead to conversions? I
don't know. I think it's going to lead to conversations. I think it's going to very clearly say that there is life after death. Mm-hmm. This is what this boy experienced, and what would you do if your son had something like this happen to you? It's going to create people to have to think. And I think at those points in times, I think all of us need to be asked the question, do you really believe what you say you do? And should you? Mm-hmm. And I think this movie will ask all of us, regardless of our backgrounds, what we've thought in the past, and what if we had a child do what this child did? What would it do to me?
Yeah, I did think about it when I saw it. As Christians, we all profess to believe in an afterlife. But when it comes down to it, how strong is that faith?
Yeah, exactly. Well, faith is really pushed when all of a sudden God doesn't do what you prayed for. Do you still believe in God when He had a different plan? And this isn't heaven yet, so bad things happen to good people. Mm-hmm. This movie is honest about all that.
Yeah. Well, since this occurred, mm-hmm. What is your mission, Todd? I'm not trying to say you have to have one. I'm sorry, I don't mean to say that. But it's a fair question. You've had this experience.
Yeah. Well, for me, we took a risk. 4 years ago now, when we decided to first share Colton's story, mm-hmm. and back to the whole revelation of my daughter again. I pray, and I make a lot of decisions based on prayer.
Sure. And
as I was praying, God spoke to me, and He said, "You remember the peace you experienced when you found out about your daughter?" I'm like, "Oh God, that was awesome." Mm-hmm. The Bible talks about a peace that passes understanding. At that moment, I knew what that was. And I go, "Oh yeah, God, that was incredible." And He's like, "Well, is it right for you to keep that peace to yourself?" And it just hit me. Because I want you to write. I had people coming to my door that knock on my door. "God told us to tell you to write a book," and I didn't even know who they were. I'd say, "Oh, fine, go away," I mean, I had God pursued me, but it was that decision that we finally took a risk. Okay, if my son can give other people the kind of peace that it's given to me, what he experienced, I'll risk writing about it. I had no clue we would be sitting here today. I had no clue millions of people would find his story. I had none of that, but that was the decision we made. Now, here's my question to you. If you make a decision or an agreement with God to help people, when do you say, "God, I've helped enough people, I can quit now"?
I don't know if you ever do.
That's my problem.
Yeah. Todd, thank you so much for being here. The book's fantastic. I urge people to go out and read the book and to see the movie.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.